good there.
Yeah, we'll grab you some. We'll grab you some after.
Yeah.
Stani, thank you so much for joining today. I know you're very busy, heading around Bangkok all day. I think there are a few topics I wanted to chat with you about today. You have been chatting a lot on Twitter and on podcasts about the DeFi renaissance, and I want to hear your thoughts on why now is such a special time for DeFi. I want to hear about what's coming up for Aave, because there's quite a lot. I want to hear about some of the collaborative efforts that you have done with other teams, including Maker. That was a big announcement pretty recently. And then I think we'll look to the future. But first off, tell me about the DeFi renaissance. Tell me why now is such a special time for DeFi.
Yeah, I mean, I think I calculated that this is my 7th year, or like I've been now building on chain for 7 years. And it feels like forever, to be honest. And when I started back in 2016, 17, a lot of this stuff was very just plain experimentation. So the whole word DeFi didn't exist, like decentralized finance. It was just like few like interesting dApps that were being built on Ethereum, and some of them were like more financial, and for example, decentralized exchanges and like very early primitives. And from my perspective, I wanted to just purely like experiment something on chain and build. And what I saw kind of like interesting is being able to bring lending and borrowing on chain, and the idea of having cryptographic collateral. And at some point, obviously what happened with DeFi is that some of these primitives just matured and there were more users. And then back in 2020, when we launched first version of the Aave protocol, that was the year when there was massive lockdowns, and COVID was at that time. So people were actually on their computers online all the time, and obviously you saw higher interest rates than in traditional finance, so everyone was kind of experiencing and experimenting from that perspective. So when you look at everything that's being built in DeFi over the years, a lot of that is subsidized by the ownership of these protocols and communities, and I think it's a great way of actually distributing ownership around a product and a protocol. But at the same time, now that 7 years or so has passed, or let's say even 5 years, what we start to see is actually protocols that are generating revenue, have certain fundamentals, have certain product market fit, and are providing a lot of high utility for the users. And that for me is very fascinating, because these protocols aren't really like run as businesses, but they're run as open communities. And that's a significantly important thing to realize, because it's really hard to create a successful company, but it's 10 times harder to create a successful DAO and that is running a successful protocol. And now that we have few of them, and they're making revenue, making income, it's kind of a statement that you can actually build something in DeFi, and it can become really valuable and profitable, and that profit can be steered back to the users. And that's the kind of idea that I see DeFi renaissance, is that some of these protocols are going to stay here, hopefully forever, and hopefully for giving access to everyone in the planet, essentially.
I love that, and I love that you hear a lot of people within crypto talk about community, and that could mean a lot of different things. But I think one thing that's shared between Uniswap and Aave is there are very solid, very real, definable communities of delegates, of, in Aave's case, lenders, borrowers, developers on top. Same with Uniswap. You have interfaces, hook developers, swappers, et cetera. And when you talk about community as a core input into the growth of Aave, I would love to just hear how you think about that, how you've cultivated the community, and also learnings that you're kind of taking into this next era as it relates to growing and cultivating a community?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I still meet people today that have been following everything we've built since the day one. Like people still come
since ETHLand.
Since ETHLand, they come and talk, and they appreciate the kind of like ongoing innovation that is happening in the Aave ecosystem, and that's a really nice feeling because it really means that we've been able to just like be on this like a continuous mission and just provide something better on an ongoing basis. And you really kind of like see community like in a sense. It's hard to like establish community unless you go like ups and downs of different market cycles, because at that point you kind of like see like who are the people who are around and who are actually caring about what you're building, and especially when you have a decentralized community and you have a DAO and you have contributors all over the place with different kinds of opinions, that's kind of like what is really essence there. And I've seen like different implementations of DAOs. In some cases, it's it's really hard to make any kind of a decision in a DAO, and you have different opinions, and nothing's moving forward. Luckily, with Aave DAO, there's been always this kind of like idea of being able to agree on things as much as possible that really makes sense, and just pushing towards forward. And that's really important because DAOs are kind of like they're not really companies, they're more of like governments, but you don't want to like have a government running a something like a protocol where you have to have innovation on an ongoing basis. So for me, like establishing a good community is something that really defines where that project will go in the future.
I think the threading the needle around where DAOs and governance can provide value and is valuable versus where you maybe need a more opinionated view on like how to develop and build a protocol is really interesting and is being figured out by I think definitely on the Uniswap side. That's been an evolving story over time. I think for Aave, I'm curious to hear how community and governance and potentially new stakeholder groups play into the next phase for Aave. So I know you have Aave 2030, the plan that was recently introduced to the Aave DAO, Aave V4 coming up. I'm curious to hear, some of the new like features being introduced. I know there's like more modular architecture that potentially brings new players into the realm. I know there are impacts on governance. I'm curious to hear, even thinking about the partnership with Maker, how that brings new stakeholders into the fold and how their contributions will impact the future of Aave.
Yeah, I mean, for V4, the kind of a story and part of this bigger kind of Aave 2030 proposal is that we just see that we're still very early in this space, and like I personally believe that DeFi will take another decade to just get adoption. So like I really hope that I could say that in a couple of years like there's going to be a lot of institutions and everyone is going to be using DeFi and I would love to paint that kind of like a picture, but the reality is that we're not just like changing like technology, like we're changing finance, we're changing how a financial infrastructure works today, something that everyone relies every day and have been like putting their maximum trust into it. So the change is going to be really, really slow. And what we realize is that what we've built so far is really valuable, but we have to keep iterating as any piece of software. So there's no really difference between if you're building on chain or building traditional software, you still have to improve it on an ongoing basis, and that's why there has been like Aave V2 and V3 and we're building Aave v4, and same for Uniswap v2 and v3 and v4. So there has to be this constant innovation going on. And also, what we think is that the future version of Aave v4 should be something that is really easy to contribute into. And having that modular architecture will help quite a lot. But there's also a lot of features that actually improve the existing status quo. And we can implement the learnings that we had, adding risk premiums, which allow us to reprice the actual risk and reward within the same pool. Because one of the reasons why people use Aave is that it's so simple. You just can go to one single pool and supply liquidity, and you don't need to worry about where you need to allocate capital. And we want to keep that experience, but just make it much more accurate to actually quantify the risk positions within the protocol and then in the same market, and then ensure that the suppliers are able to earn more and the protocol isn't taking excessive risk there. So, and obviously we want to build it together with the community. So obviously it's an initiative from the Aave Labs, but down the line it's a piece of software that anyone can actually contribute to as well.
I think thinking about collaboration, I think one thing that you as a founder and leader in the space have done, and Aave Labs has done, that is pretty interesting to me, is lead through collaboration with other protocols that some may say are competitors. So I want to hear you talk a little bit about the Skyforce initiative that you've worked on with Rune Christensen at Sky, previously known as MakerDAO, or maybe still known as both at this point in time.
They went Sky, Maker, and now Sky.
Okay, Sky, Maker, Sky. Yeah. I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that, because, you know, Aave Labs, you guys have Go, you have a stable coin now that works somewhat similarly to DAI. You know, someone from TradFi or Web2 world might look at you guys and say, hey, shouldn't you be competing with one another? Why are you now partnering on this initiative? And I'm curious to hear why you've taken that approach and why you think that's strategic to the future growth of DeFi.
Yeah, I think the approach there was pretty much the same that we had in the early days of DeFi, that when you saw a new protocol coming on chain, the liquidity just increased. So all this innovation that we've been building over the years has just been able to create more opportunities, and that has been really valuable. And more recently, there's obviously there's different types of lending protocols, different types of AMMs and decentralized exchanges and stablecoins, and that's the beauty of DeFi. It's just an open ecosystem. You can build anything you need to. There's no restrictions of API endpoints. You know, it's just like it's a free place to innovate, and that's great. And that's why a lot of things are coming on chain all the time. And what we think is that being kind of like a leader in the space and having these bigger established brands, we also have an opportunity to actually grow together in a way where if we put these brands together, we're able to grow the pie even further. And I think this is really important, especially for institutions who are looking into the space and they want to see more kind of like a professionalism as well. Yeah. So I think that plays really important role. And the second thing is that usually whoever is using decentralized finance, they reallocate capital into multiple places, and that works for our all benefits. So I think overall, the partnership is a great example of just putting two big DeFi projects together and innovating, and also having these different initiatives as well. So we're overall quite happy how things has been going, and hopefully we see similar partnerships in the future too.
Yeah, we were talking a bit about this backstage, and I thought there are so many interesting components to that collaboration. There's it seems like, like joint distribution, kind of, access and seamless interaction between the protocols on the interfaces. But there's also some components related to incentive alignment between the protocols. So how do you think about do you think about this as an expansion of the Aave community now to include Maker, of the Maker community to include Aave, and how do you, I guess that must also play into, being stronger together and kind of more positive sum than zero sum competing?
Yeah, and I think the incentive alignment is very valuable in DeFi, and specifically in the way where the incentives are aligned towards the users. Mm-hmm. So basically, in this case, for example, the suppliers into the Aave pools of USD as are getting incentives. And it's actually quite interesting because if you really kind of like take a little bit of distance and look at the partnership, it's as if kind of like Maker is more of on the kind of back end, while Aave is the kind of like a front end component there, and leveraging that distribution that Aave, for example, has. And sorry, this is the conversation we have with Rune all the time, where he's actually saying that Aave has been able to build a product that is really appealing, and that creates distribution, and that's something where fits really well to the Maker's endgame model, where they're just looking different kinds of yield sources where they can actually distribute and allocate capital. So it really works quite nice hand in hand.
I love that. I'm very excited to see how that plays out. I think it's a unique precedent to set, and I'm excited to see kind of what other kinds of collaborations happen between larger DeFi protocols in the space to be stronger together in that way.
Yeah.
I think lastly, I want to acknowledge the fact that there are many hackers and builders in the room, and you are one of the OG builders in the Ethereum space. I would love, if you were to you have all these builders here, what do you want to see built in DeFi over the next few years? We're in this DeFi renaissance era. There are so many opportunities to build. So much has been done, but I think there's so much to learn from over the last few years of iteration and innovation. What's kind of maybe falling outside of Aave's mandate that you want to see done and you want to see built by these folks in the audience today?
Well, obviously something that is integrating Aave and Uniswap. No, seriously, this is like an area it has had like a very little focus, and I think there is a lot that can be actually done, especially with the hooks and things like credit delegation and a bunch of other features. I think that's like a really underexplored area. And if I can give one really good advice that I kind of like wished I would give to myself like a few years ago is building something simple and trying to focus on simplicity, because simplicity scales, and it's very easy from technical standpoint to overcomplicate your product. And that's like a very big advice I usually try to give to other builders. And I think a lot of innovation in DeFi doesn't have to happen necessarily on a protocol level. In fact, I think a lot of the innovation will actually happen on the application level and an experience level. And I think that's a really understated area to build. And I do think there's a lot of value in composability. And then obviously AI has a lot actually to do in DeFi. And I think it's a kind of like a perfect environment for execution in the future and capital allocation based on AI agents as well. So I think that's a really cool area to develop as well. And I think that's going to be also a big part of DeFi in the future.
If there are builders in the audience who are interested in maybe digging into some of those use cases, maybe building interfaces and apps for different kinds of assets or for different jurisdictions, we've got folks from around the world here. What's the best way to get in contact with your team or to learn more about how to build on Aave? How can folks do that?
Yeah, I mean, you can connect me you can connect anywhere where I am on Lens, on Twitter, on Telegram. I'm pretty sure you'll find my handle.
Awesome. Well, our time, unfortunately, with Stani is up. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. Thanks all.